Hello and welcome to Fats on Film. I am your host, Hannah Ogilvie-Young, and this is the podcast where we discuss all things fat representation in film, TV, and wider media. This week, I am joined by ADHD nutritionist and anti-diet expert, Jeanette Thompson-Wessen. Hello, Jeanette!
Hello, thank you for having me. I've been so looking forward to this. This is my highlight of my week.
Oh my god, I'm really humbled to hear that. Like, thank you so much. I mean, it's just like I was saying to you just before I hit record. It's just me in my loft talking about fat representation, and I'm glad it brings joy. I'm glad it can bring joy to guests and listeners alike.
Well, we need more fat joy. So
Absolutely true that. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, Jeanette, because we've interacted a bit on social media, like as you do. Like I feel the fat plus size space, anti-diet space, when you find your like allies within that, the algorithm obviously knows that and keeps like pushing you towards each other. So I was really excited to have you on because I'm really interested in the idea of ADHD nutrition, because as someone who highly suspects I might fall into that category, and someone who's has had their own kind of nutrition or like bad eating habits in my past and things like that, I think that's really fascinating that you're actually kind of found that niche for yourself. How did you come to that?
it was a bit of a wild journey. I have been a nutritionist for about 16 years.
Oh, wow, it's a long
Worked
time.
in education as well, teaching children about nutrition and cooking. So I have like a big long background in all of that. The majority of that, unfortunately, is from a fat is bad point of view. So we call that like weight normative is how we describe that. So a lot of my background was we all must need to lose weight. And for me as a person who I am a fat nutritionist, so I have ranged between being a small fat to what I am now, which is a mid fat as well. And I have always been on the diet train, trying to get back and thinking to myself, even though I knew how nutrition works and I know how body deals with it, I always thought to myself, maybe I will find that one diet that I can stick to and I will end up being, the weight that I'm supposed to be as a nutritionist. And it always really held me back until I ended up discovering Health at Every Size and intuitive eating. And something in my mind, just like a light bulb moment, was just like, there are reasons why I have never been able to lose weight and then to keep it off. And that kind of snowballed into me doing my own work around my body and around eating, because by then I had experienced so much disordered eating, definitely borderline eating disorders as well along the way. And I ended up kind of doing what I do now. The reason why I say that in the relation to this has all been like a learning process in regards to me personally, because I started my business in helping people with intuitive eating and helping people accept their fat bodies, which I have loved and continue to love as well. And it's morphed and it's changed. And it was probably maybe nearly a couple of years ago now where I just lost it. As in, I remember messaging my friends being like, I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna shut it all down. I'm gonna shut everything down. I'm not gonna do any of it. I can't do anything. And I was in this massive, massive spiral. And I didn't realize until maybe a few months later, where all my friends had been like, no, okay, take a step back, breathe. Don't do anything hastily. Like, let's think about this. I love my friends. They are incredible. My husband was the same. He is also incredible. Just kind of helped me with that. And it wasn't until I got to the other side that I thought to myself, was what I was experiencing ADHD burnout? And I read more about it, learned more about it, started putting two and two together. The more I learned about ADHD, the more I was like, I probably have ADHD.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was probably really big ADHD burnout that I was experiencing, which was really useful to learn because I can now put things in place that helps you not get to that place back again. So yeah, it has been a moment it's a fairly new thing to myself in like learning that. But then my mind also swung to, how our minds connect with things like intuitive eating, eating habits in general, and nutrition as well. And it has been a fascinating learning experience. And so little of these things are known by people as well.
100%.
And we're not really taught anyway to have a good relationship with food because of diet culture and because of anti-fatness that we experience all around us anyway. So actually, even if we're neurotypical, it's difficult anyway, then
Yeah.
add those layers, that intersectional layer of being neurodivergent and having
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, it makes it even more difficult to know what a good relationship with food is, and also how to kind of weed through all the misinformation that I can see everywhere, which frustrates me so much with ADHD and nutrition as well.
That's fascinating because I've been very open in like my content. Like I did suffer from binge eating for a very long time, and I have like thankfully found recovery within that. But it was only afterwards did I start showing like real signs of potential ADHD. Obviously, I've not been diagnosed, so I'm let's not take everything with a pinch of salt. But one of the things that like really like shocked me was like how prevalent binge eating is in people who have ADHD and like that dopamine chasing. And I'm like, that is me all over. And I was like, why has that never ever come up before? And like things like I always had this kind of like all or nothing attitude. Like whenever I approached any diet, it was always like, well, I've got to hit it to the letter. And if I haven't, well, I've obviously failed the diet, so I might as well throw out the whole day and then binge, right? That's how I approached every diet. And again, it's like, why did no one tell me? But I think it's like a lack of obviously education, and also like the constant way we approach diets is to put the blame on you. Like, oh well, you have no willpower. Your head's not right. It's your fault because this diet works if you follow it to the letter, and if you haven't followed it to the letter, then it's your fault. You're a bad person. Guilt, 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 guilt. And so no one really wants to pay attention to why you failed the diet. You right?
It doesn't pay off with capitalism, does it?
Honestly, if someone's the listeners will be like going, capitalism bingo, it's already been hit. Ding, ding, ding. Oh no.
It always comes back to that though.
It does. It absolutely does. Like, there's money to be made here, and ultimately that's the game we're all playing as well, isn't it? Like, unfortunately, it's like you mentioned, you I mean, obviously you're part of this kind of community and part of this line of work, but it is absolutely everywhere. And we're recording in January. And it's just, I don't know whether it's because I'm so much more heightened to it. Like I know what I'm looking for now and I know the bullshit when I see the bullshit, but it feels so bad this year. Have you felt like that?
It feels like we're wading through some kind of glue at the moment in regards to diet culture. I think it's also reflective of our like Ozempic era that we're in as well. I think it's that kind of,
Yeah.
We're having so much information thrown at us about weight loss drugs, and we're almost back to like the noughties level of anti-fatness and a minute on your lips, a lifetime on your hips, and heroin chic, and all of that joy that we had to experience with Kate Moss. It feels like hell.
I know, it's rough, and I think that's why, I mean, I've definitely come into 2025 with a real motivation to get this podcast back out there in a more regular schedule. Firstly, because I'm not got as much on my plate, thankfully, this year, but also I think it's important more than now than ever to really. It's hard because I think being fat has always been a political statement, whether you mean to or not. But now, because of the era we're living in, it feels like an act of rebellion, for lack of a better term, to not give in. And give in is not fair. That's not fair. But like to not to not listen to the propaganda that's being fed, and to stand and do the right thing for you and your body and your mental health. Like that has become an absolute minefield. And I think like the fact we're both sat here today and we're going to talk about fat representation, and I believe a really positive media. I think that's a really important message to get out right now.
Yeah, I think we're seeing such a shift. I think we're seeing the shift from people that in our community felt like were allied to us
Yes.
to selling of weight loss, and talking about
Yeah.
weight loss. And we're seeing bodies like ours being pushed aside now, whereas, rewind 2 years ago, we were seeing, okay, not great representation, but we were seeing a little bit better.
Well,
We're
yeah.
getting some crumbs.
Yeah, well, I mean, like plus sizes were available in more shops than they are now.
Yeah,
For example,
yeah,
H&M no longer does a big chunk of their plus size section, and it is an erasure. And it's interesting because I've definitely felt maybe over the past 5 years it was fading, probably around during COVID, because weight loss surgery was just becoming so prevalent, and I was meeting people I felt all the time who'd had it, and I was like, oh, this isn't great. And then, but it wasn't, I don't know if this is a fair thing to say. It didn't feel too bad during that time. But now, because we're in this weight loss drug era, it's so much worse. It feels like that, like fivefold. And I'm like, oh, everyone around me is on it for weight loss reasons. I think I need to make that clear, because obviously people are on it for legitimate medical reasons, and all power to you.
absolutely.
Crack on, please. Oh my god, get the medical care you need. It's just when it's being used for purely weight loss, I'm like, oh, this isn't good.
It feels really gross. And then when you layer on the really kind of horrible tactics that these pharmaceutical companies are doing as well, to be
Yeah.
able to just market their product. And that's
Yeah.
what they're doing ultimately. They are fantastic marketers.
Oh my
I mean,
god, aren't
they
they?
have swung this brilliantly,
Well
and
done.
they are winning. They're cashing in.
Yes, that's a really good way of putting it. They are winning.
They are, and
Yes.
they're winning this at
Yes.
the moment. But they're doing it through such unethical and immoral ways as well,
Mm-hmm.
that because of anti-fatness are being
Mm-hmm.
completely ignored, because it's almost this societal norm of, well, yeah, of course, you're fat, you want to lose weight. Yeah, naturally. Of course you want to
Of
lose weight.
course you
Of course.
would.
Of course you've tried, and it has, and this is the narrative that we have right now. Of course we know that you've tried really hard. We understand that. I've seen so many people who are weight loss people going, I know that diets don't work,
Mm.
but have you tried this? And usually it's a weight loss drug
Yes.
or another diet that they're trying to sell. It's just it all wrapped up in a completely different bow. But
Yeah.
it's not without consequence to people. And I think
Mm-hmm.
this is the problem. We've got a lot of people talking about food noise and how
Mm-hmm.
it lessens food noise. And I
Mm-hmm.
understand, like, that food noise that people experience is
Mm-hmm.
horrible.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go away, and it's intense, and it carries on and on. So I understand that people want relief from that. I get that
Oh god,
completely.
100%. I empathize full-heartedly.
But also at the same time, we can't have that drug forever. And what side
Mm-hmm.
effects is that bringing us? We've got so many different side effects that are coming out
Mm-hmm.
that are problems. We've got the unethical way that they're doing things. It just feels like it feels like a storm is kind
Mm-hmm.
of brewing with that. And I hope it isn't, because people's health.
I was going to say, people are on the line here, yeah.
Yeah. And I would much rather people not lose their health
Oh my god.
in whatever way. So I'm hoping whatever perfect storm is brewing with that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't involve people who are actually having that medication. But I'm also hoping that it all kind of just goes away and dissipates. So
Yes.
we're just left with something that's a bit less intense, because it
Yeah.
feels so in your face right now. Whenever I go to social media,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how many times I click, I'm not interested.
Yes. Yes.
I at this time of day, not the time of day. If this time of year, I would just get diets and diets and diets. I'm not just getting the diets. It is just come to our pharmacy. We're doing weight loss drugs. Come to our pharmacy. Buy it from me. Buy it from me. Buy it from me. And I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see any of this.
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
I
want it.
totally agree. As a content creator, I get offered all the time the drugs or surgery, and
You.
apparently, but yeah, literally today, this morning, I woke up to one, and they said they were a pharmacy, and so I said, well, what do you sell? And they were like, anything. And then I clicked on their profile and it was like GLP-1, weight loss, GLP-1, weight loss. And I was just like, and I went, you clearly haven't looked at my content to know how much this is not for me or my followers. That is not the community I'm about building. Like, get out of here. And what really sucks is like when PTs find me, I just think, have you just searched hashtag plus size and just gone after, because go back to what you said earlier, the assumption is you must want to lose weight, right?
Of course you do.
Of course. Why? And I just like that assumption. It's not just rude. It actually hurts. It hurts that you have made such a ridiculous assumption, and it's a nasty assumption. It's this idea that you don't think I could possibly be happy in the body that I currently inhibit. And like, it just really, really grinds my gears, because I've worked, I mean, like, you'll know, like, we've both worked so hard to get to a place of peace, and then you just get these strangers who just make these like blanket assumptions, and you're like, educate yourself, please. Or even just look through my content and realize how much that's not my bag. You know what I mean? Anyway, so the next question I have for you, Jeanette, is the word fat itself. Now, I appreciate we both kind of used it in the last conversation, but I appreciate that we've both done a lot of kind of unlearning to get to the point where we could say the word fat in a very non-judgmental, or just, use it as it should be used, which is a descriptive term. Like, how did that journey to destigmatize the word fat come about for you?
For me, it was it came second to me starting to work with intuitive eating on my own, so
Interesting.
myself. And it was really important to me as soon as I discovered it, because I felt so stuck with my eating. And I felt I felt like I knew exactly, I'm a nutritionist. I know the theory into how to nourish myself and how to nourish myself well. But where I kept on getting stuck was on the anti-fat, the internalized anti-fatness that I had. And I kept on going, well, if I was nourishing myself, then surely I wouldn't be putting on weight. Like, that shouldn't be happening, surely.
Yeah.
But that I had to work on that internalized anti-fatness to be able to help myself with that. And it wasn't until I started reading more and then realizing that actually what my body was doing was coming to a place of like recovery and finding a recovery body from dieting, from disordered eating. And it wasn't really until after I had my first baby, and she's 8 years old now, that I kind of was like, okay, I'm listening to you, body. We're going to go with this. And one of the biggest reasons for that, I have intense guilt about it still to this day, is when I was really far gone with my pregnancy, they wanted to weigh me. And I knew the reason why they wanted to weigh me was because they wanted me, they have a BMI limit and a weight limit for giving birth in a birthing centre.
Oh, okay, did not know that.
They have weight limits at everything in the NH.
Apparently.
And I really was desperate to give birth in the birthing centre rather than having to go to the hospital.
Sure.
And I had already started my intuitive eating stuff, but I was so worried about it, and I had weighed myself because of that. And I was still in my internalized anti-fatness because I hadn't started challenging it properly just yet. And I looked at my weight and I thought, oh God, like, I'm probably going to be on the borderline of not being able to actually go there, because my body is supposed to be fat. That is the way that my body is supposed to be. So I put myself on a really intense Slimming World diet. I was about 35 weeks pregnant at the time. I was eating zero sins. If anyone has any experience in Slimming World, I did that, and I did that, I'd stuck to a letter of like all the rules. And I did that for desperately crash dieted for like 3 weeks maybe.
Wow.
And I got the midwife appointment at the birthing centre, and she weighed me. It was the first thing she did, and she congratulated me. She said, "Well done. You actually weigh the same that you did weigh on your 8-week booking in appointment." So bearing in mind how heavily pregnant I weighed the same heavily pregnant as what I did when I had no bump and I was 8 weeks, and I was congratulated
Oh,
and
it's
said,
congratulations.
"Well done. You've done brilliantly. This is excellent." I had the rubber stamp, felt fine, went on massive binge. Like
Mm.
I binged for days and days, probably weeks after that, to be honest. But my next other appointment after that, my growth had slowed down with my baby.
Mm-hmm.
So I was sent for extra growth, like scans to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that she was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, she was fine,
Mm.
but her growth had slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why her growth had slowed down was because I put myself on a crash diet. I
Mm-hmm.
knew as a nutritionist,
Mm-hmm.
logically, scientifically, biologically, that wasn't a good idea. Yet how strong my internalized anti-fatness
Yeah.
was, I really want to make sure that this happens because
Mm-hmm.
of, gatekeeping of weight in the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want that to stand in the way. So I did that to me and my baby. And that's how strong it is. So when
Yes.
people and experience their own internalized anti-fatness, I think all of us really understand that, because the
Yeah.
violence that we've been shown as fat people,
Mm-hmm.
we've internalized that
Mm-hmm.
into ourselves. I'm really lucky now that after that, and after that experience and the intense guilt, I was like, okay, we need to learn. We need to start undoing all this. So from undoing all of that and unraveling and challenging and starting to actually use the word, I am fat. I am fat. And yes, it is part of my identity, because a
Mm.
lot of people are like, why are you
Yeah, I
making it
get
your
that.
identity? I'm making it my identity because it is radical to be fat
Yeah.
and to say I'm fat. Yes, for other people, I will automatically say large bodied, because I
Yeah.
know that a lot of people find it very uncomfortable to call themselves fat. But me,
Totally.
I love my fat body. And I can actually say that. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people feel like they can get there.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that, you know, most people can get there, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not their fault if they don't get there, because it's society, it's not us. It's
No.
not us that's doing that to ourselves.
No.
It's society that's making us feel so terrible. And I'm sure that, I've had other parts of my life, which unfortunately have been medical based, that have made me move away from love for my body back to a place of not hatred, but resentment.
Mm.
And then that's where we bring in those tools again to kind of externalize that resentment, because that's not me. My body's just trying to exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm trying to do.
And it's
And
as
I
simple
happen
as
to
that.
exist in a fat body, and this body is fat. It is nourished. It
Yeah.
is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think that, it's such a fantastic, and I use that word in an odd way, but a fantastic example of how ingrained the fat phobia is. And we've been fighting this since we were born, right?
Yeah,
You come in and
absolutely.
that's just how the
Yeah.
world is set up. That's what we're told. And very importantly, that's what the media portrays as well, which is why this podcast exists. So let's get into why we're here. We are here to discuss what we do in the shadows of the TV show. The TV show. So this is an American horror mockumentary style TV show, and it's created by Jermaine Clement, and it's based on the film of the same name, the New Zealand film of the same name from 2014. It first aired in 2019 on FX, and it actually finished last year in 2024 after 6 seasons. It stars Kevin Novak, Matt Berry, Natasha Dimitro. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, Natasha. Sorry. Harvey Guillen and Mark Proksch. I'm going to say that's your name, and I'm sorry, Mark, that I did not Google how to say your name. And it was nominated for several awards. It has a few Emmy nominations, but it actually hasn't won anything mainstream, which I was quite surprised at, because this has a really good kind of cult following. It was rated quite well on Rotten Tomatoes. It was around the 80 to 90% for each season. So yes, Jeanette, could you please let me and the audience know what We Do in the Shadows is all about?
It's a mockumentary where people, like, you've got a crowd of like cameras and like a film crowd following vampires just going along their lives. It's incredibly awkward,
Yes.
very funny, quite tongue-in-cheek and very dry in places. And it's just about the stuff that these vampires, this group of vampires that live in a house in New York, I believe, wasn't it?
It's Staten Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just get up to, I don't know, get up to things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They're just hijinks, isn't it?
I love it. Loved it. So I watched it with the film when it first came out, and
Yes.
loved it instantly because at the time I was loving everything to do with. Did you ever watch Flight of the Conchords?
Absolutely loved Flight of the Conchords.
It was a masterpiece.
It was very good.
It was very good. Off the time, but masterpiece.
Oh yeah, sure. Off the time, but great.
And yeah, so it kind of, I watched that, and dry, brilliant, hilarious. These vampires kind of not really knowing what to do in modern life, and I love that. I love how they're all kind of stuck in their times, but trying to learn about like modern times at the same time, and when they start to integrate into or try to integrate into society and the stuff that comes from that. The final series, the series before that, when Nandor ends up in like some kind of gym cult. I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, so good. So good. You're absolutely right. It's like these characters, these vampires who are like, hundreds of years old, confronting their own mortality, or immortality, I should say, but in a world that is just passing them by. And there's something quite poignant about that. But then it's how do they then entertain themselves within that? Because they've got forever to live,
I always wonder where they're getting the money from.
It's a very good question. I'm just assuming they've just accumulated it over the hundreds of years. It's like the vampires in Twilight, like Edward's family. They're just so happen to be really wealthy, but like how? They don't do anything. They go to school.
How are they existing in all of this like love it? Yeah,
it makes no sense.
So funny.
So good. So when we think about Facts on Film, why did you pick What We Do in the Shadows to discuss on this podcast?
Because I thought it'd be quite interesting to think about the Fat cast and what I quite like about it is that, I mean, I haven't watched the other series like for a while. I watch them as they come out. I don't remember noting any really violent anti-fatness from the program. And these characters have just been allowed to kind of exist in their bodies as they are, without any kind of weight loss thing, without comments, or at least overt comments about that kind of thing. And I find that really interesting. But I also find that very interesting that we're talking about cis men, and it's more acceptable for a cis man to be fat. What do you think?
Yeah. I think absolutely you're right. I think it is more acceptable for men to be fat. It's interesting because when I watched a couple of episodes, because I haven't seen the latest season, which is season 6. So I was watching a couple of episodes of that just to see what the vibe was. And what really struck me when I was watching it was, actually, I don't think any of this cast is what I would consider to be like Hollywood thin. They're all really like, if you look at like Nandor and Nadia or Colin Robinson, they're just kind of like just straight sized people. And again, one thing that struck me was their costuming actually adds a lot of bulk to them, because they're wearing all of these layers and really like pronounced shoulders and big sleeves and big skirts. And I was like, that is so interesting. And I know it's because obviously they're meant to be dressing over time, but it's also still an active choice to make them dress over time, to make them have all this like added layers that does add weight, quote unquote, to their frame. And I really enjoyed like how on Hollywood lens it was. Bear in mind, this is an American show. It has quite a big British cast randomly, but it is an American show, obviously, but then created by New Zealanders. So you have all this kind of nuance going on, and I was like, oh, I really like how, like, if I compared it to, say, like The Office, which is like a good example because again that kind of mockumentary style, all of the kind of like love interests in The Office are all thin women. And then you do have Phyllis, who is the kind of fat woman in that office, but she is not meant to be a love interest at all. Whereas then if you can come back to What We Do in the Shadows, obviously Nadia's meant to be this incredibly like sexy and randy vampire with her husband Lazlo, but I wouldn't say she was like, she's just like like I say, normal, like a mid-sized, normal, kind of average-sized woman, and I just really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think it really goes against beauty standards, but I also think, like you said, it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about vampires and stuff, are they trying to exaggerate the othering, if that makes sense?
Interesting. Maybe. But then, to flip it, like, one of the big things of vampirism is that they're sexy. Like, they are, like, sex on legs. And so it is a choice to have, like, Matt Berry play. I want to make it incredibly clear, audience. I think Matt Berry is sex on legs, okay? I have for years. He is so hot. His voice is insane.
Brilliant.
He's so fantastic, right? But conventionally speaking, I can recognize he might not be to everyone's taste because of the internalized fat phobia and all that good stuff. But he is also playing this really sexy vampire who, like, what is he like? I love to fuck and suck blood. That's his thing. And I was just like, oh, I love it. I really loved that was the choice. Oh, see, again, we always come up against this question in this podcast, which is like, have they cast the person for their body size, or have they cast them because they were the best person for the job? And I don't want to in any way belittle anyone's talent and that they were only cast for their body size. I would hate to ever infer that. But I think in this situation, I think it's like Matt Berry is like so perfect for the role of Lazlo. I couldn't imagine another actor taking that role.
He's like the embodiment of Lazlo.
He really is. He really, really is. And he's hot and he's sexy but he's also like a fool. That's another thing I actually love. I mean, the 2014 film has this in common, but these vampires are fools. And I think that's really fun because, again, vampires are meant to be like these sexy, smart, who've been around for centuries. They know how the world works. And then these
clumsy.
Oh, they're so clumsy. They're so silly. They don't know what's going on. Like, Nandor is just the sweetest silly goose boy. And it's like he's been around for literally thousands of years. And it just hasn't got a clue. And I think it's such a fun show to watch. And to your point, I was very pleasantly surprised at how little it is commented on the body sizes of our characters, which is fantastic. Obviously, we have Lazlo, and then we have Guillermo de la Cruz, who is Nandor's familiar, played by Harvey Guillén, and he's a larger person as well, and he's absolutely phenomenal as Guillermo. What do you think about Guillermo?
I love how it was something because I'm currently watching their last series now.
Okay, perfect.
And if people haven't seen any of the series, a little bit of a spoiler, where he ends up becoming like the vampire, like slayer, like what is that, the vampire slayer?
Yeah, he's like Van Helsing.
He's like Van Helsing, yeah. He's got like that in his blood.
Yes, exactly.
I love how he's a fat person doing all of these moves and like bouncing off the ceiling, beating up all these vampires and stuff as a fat person. And I'm like, more of that, please. More of that, please.
Genuinely, like, when he starts to like tap into this power that he has, and he's doing all these acrobatic moves, and he's like so in charge of the situation, and he's so capable and competent. And there's that scene where he saves his vampires from being, I think they're going to execute them or something, and he's just like a massive bloodbath of vampires, and they're watching him like they cannot believe it. But it's never from a place of, oh, can you believe this guy moves like that? Which, again, you would see in another show, right? In another show, that would absolutely be the joke. Oh my God, how is this fat person moving like this? But that's never the joke. It's just more the fact that this person they've known for years, and he's been a little bit of this shy familiar, is actually this like absolute badass.
Yeah.
It's so good.
And I think it challenges things further there, because all of those things you just said, when people assume things of fat people, they assume that we're lazy. They assume we're greedy. They assume we are unintelligent. And you know, we don't even know how to feed ourselves and how much to feed ourselves, as if we need to be educated about these kinds of things. Is that assumption that all of those things are going on which makes us fat. Whereas he is radically out there,
Mm-hmm.
you know, bouncing off walls, doing all these really cool moves. And we know where there's probably some kind of stunt person involved here, but
Sure,
you
sure,
know,
sure.
in the show, he's doing these things and
Mm-hmm.
being so confident and being
Mm,
so knowledgeable. And they are like, he is the fattest person in the
mm-hmm.
cast,
Mm-hmm.
yet they all turn to him.
Yes.
They all turn to him for, well, what do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
How do we do things? And he is kind of like the one that settles them, that kind of ties them all together. And that's the fat person that does that and is doing all these cool things. And
Mm-hmm.
that in itself, in that kind of way, is just radical. It shouldn't be radical, but it is radical to see that.
No, 100%. So I was quickly Googling because I know Harvey Guillen is very, he's a fashionista. He's very confident in his body size. And I was like, I'm sure he must have talked about this before. And I found an interview, and this is with Pop Culture Planet. And so Harvey says, quote, "It matters to see yourself represented on screen because growing up, I didn't see myself represented. I always saw the funny, chubby white man like John Candy or John Belushi. And then if I did see a Latinx character, they were cleaning the bathroom or the gangbanger, and I was like, is that the only roles I could ever play?" So the idea that I get to play so many different roles in my career so far is really exciting. From sci-fi to thriller to comedy to horror, to show that representation. Because there's going to be a kid who's watching who doesn't see themselves represented. But if I can just do something where they can say, hey, that guy did it, it's like, yes, you can, and that's worth it. Yeah, growing up, all the things that were told were my strikes against me. Like I always said, I'm always round, brown, and proud. And those are the things that people were like, well, you can't be a badass if you're above a 30-inch waist, or you can't be a badass if you're queer, you can't be a badass if you're Latin. It doesn't make sense. So to incorporate all of those things into one has been a dream come true.
And hasn't he done brilliantly at that?
I couldn't believe I found that bit of article because it was exactly what we were talking about. Like, he is a badass and a rounder person. He is queer and is getting to be like the absolute center of this show, because I think from the earlier seasons I would have said like, oh, there's not really a main character in this show, where I was just kind of watching these people all kind of just cohabit together. But then when the twist happens with Guillermo, where he does have the Van Helsing DNA and he becomes the kind of vampire slayer, and then in the future seasons, things, I don't want to spoil it for you because I don't know what you know, but things happen which it becomes very clear he is the main character of the story.
Yeah.
And like you said, he is the glue of this what family, I guess, a chosen unconventional family. It's just, again, so awesome to see that like there is a fat actor who's been given that role, a queer Latinx actor given that role, and he's the main character of it. And at no point from my recollection, and I appreciate the listeners if there is anything, I don't remember any of the characters mocking him for his size.
I don't remember it.
No, which is amazing.
They're just being allowed to exist, just as they
People.
are on like TV in a show like that, where it's ended up having a cult following. I think,
Yes.
like going back to I know I said already about Nandor and that wellness cult that he ended up in. I thought that was brilliant, and I'm so glad that they chose, because they could have chosen any of those characters to go into that plot, and I was really glad that they chose Nandor, because it would have been, for anti-fatness eyes and dark culture's eyes, it would have been more of a Naja thing, or even more of a Laszlo thing.
I was going to
Because
say
of
even
him
more
being
Lazlo,
fatter. Those people would have been more. I'm really glad that they chose Nandor for that to end up falling into that kind of plot line. I thought, well, that was also, I think a lot of their choices have been very, 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 like, very indie, I would say. But I think that
Mm-hmm.
tracks with everything that Jermaine Clement kind of does anyway, with how he chooses things. I think it's very, very intentional. that they have come away from that the kind of society norms that we would see. I think that was the whole intention of it, to show a very different side. You know, we've had glamorous, twilight, sparkly skinned vampires.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
now we've got, you know, sex hungry vampires, and Colin Robinson is utterly brilliant.
So
Just
funny.
so funny. Just anything he does makes me laugh. Just find it
He
so funny.
he I mean, I think like the gag of like when we first even introduced to Colin Robinson as him as an emotional vampire is like really clever, because we have all met an emotional vampire. I
Yes.
remember like I went this is my day job. I went to like a corporate event once, and this guy started talking about like, you know, these there are people we work with, basically how do you get on with like difficult people at work, was his whole thing. And he called them hoovers, like emotional hoovers, and I was like, oh yeah, no, I buy that. And then I watched What We Do in the Shadows and they call them emotional vampires. I was like, no, that's better.
That's better.
That
Literally
is better,
sucking the
because
life and the energy.
draining you. Exactly. I was like, that's a better metaphor here. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I love every single character of this show. But then, to be fair, like it's not actually that big of a cast either. There's only 5 of them. In the latest season, which is the last one, season 6, they introduce one of their like roommates that they haven't realized that
Yeah.
he went into a deep slumber and they didn't wake him up on New Year's Eve of 1997, and they have to wake him up now. And I was like, oh, they've got a new person. And all of a sudden, it was so funny because the first episode of that, like he like kind of sets off all of this kind of bad blood between our group, and they turn to Guillermo to like fix it.
Yeah.
And I felt the same way, because I was like, who is this guy coming to
Like, how dare
ruin coming to
you
ruin our
family
vibe?
now?
I know. I was like, well, who are you? But yeah, like I think what's actually interesting about that, talking about the representation of fatness, is as that story progresses. So he's like, what's his name? Jerry the vampire. He he's pissed off Nandor because he's basically said that Nandor's too wimpy now, and he's pissed off Lazlo and Nadja because he's reminded them of an argument they were having that meant they weren't
Yeah.
talking for 5 years, and then he's pissed off Colin Robinson because he doesn't remember Colin Robinson. Poor Colin. But Colin's retaliation is he starts gaining weight. So
Yeah.
and I was really surprised by that, because I was like, oh, what's going on? But again, no one comments on it. It's just a sight gag for the audience, and you know, it gets to a point where like he's like, you know, gaining all this weight, and he's then put into a mobility scooter, and then he's wearing like orthopedic shoes, and then I was a bit like, what did you think of that joke? Not to like set you up, but like I was a bit like, I wasn't expecting to go this way, especially after all I believe the positive representation we had until this point.
I think I think it felt like a filler more than anything else, because it didn't actually bring anything to the story
No.
and the storyline at all, I don't think. But although it's come from a place of anti-fatness, I also feel like they weren't commenting about his body
They
at the
didn't.
same time.
No,
Yes, we have like we have an inherently anti-fat audience who's going to be watching that, going like, oh yeah, you know. But also at the same time, it was a person who ended up. I call this fat accommodation. You know, people who are fat, they need to learn how to accommodate their fat bodies, because we're taught so often to either ignore our bodies, because we should be so far separated from our body because our bodies are horrible, disgusting, they're wrong because we're fat, all that jazz. And so we try and separate ourselves as much as possible, ignore what's going on, or we feel as if we have to punish ourselves by not accommodating ourselves. And
yes.
being able to see a fat person actually giving themselves accommodation, I thought in a roundabout way was quite a nice thing, because he was just giving himself unconditional permission to accommodate his fat body. Okay, pretend fat body. But I think when we spin it like that, and I know that we're not going to get that from everyone, and it's only going to be niche spaces that you're going to be able to hear the words of fat accommodation. Like a really good example as well of fat accommodation is accepting that maybe your feet's going to hurt when you've gone for a walk, or you're on holiday and you want to go and walk in places. So rather than wearing sandals, make sure you wear comfortable footwear like the orthopedic ones. That's great fat accommodation, knowing that in the summer you're going to be hotter, because yes, we are fat, and yes, we have more weight on ourselves and more fat, so we are going to have to accommodate to ourselves. How can we do that? We buy a fan. And we carry a fan around with us, or we buy one of the neck fans, which I got a couple of summers ago, and I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing in the world. We try and plan for air-conditioned places if we can, if that's available to us. You know, those are all accommodations. Yes, the scene itself came from Anti-Fat Place, but I don't think it's without showing that people can give themselves that accommodation that they need to have, without people be like, oh, you're disgusting, and oh, you should lose weight, because no one was saying that to him.
No, I think it's interesting because I believe your point of view is very optimistic, but as you say, like, the audience will be coming from a very anti-fat place.
Very
and when I saw him in the mobility scooter, as much as he may need one, as much as he should have one if he needs one, I know the joke is,
he's so fat, he's ended up in a mobility scooter.
And it's like, you know, the people, you know, when they film fat people in Walmart because they want to take the piss out of them on the internet, or like at Disneyland or whatever it might be. And that's what I think they were trying to do. I just thought it was such a cheap gag.
It was cheap.
And I was just disappointed. And I also think again, if they were going to go down this route, why not explore? Well, why is he gaining weight? Because vampires don't eat. So how is he gaining the weight?
How is that happening?
How is it happening? But no. It doesn't ever go at that level because it's such a shallow joke.
Because it's just a side, like, it doesn't help the storyline.
No. It
just didn't need to be there.
No, I was just disappointed that was the first episode of the last season. And I was like, well, you've got this far. You got this far. You have a fat person as your protagonist. Why did you fall here? Just a bizarre gag. Couldn't quite believe it was happening. But anyway, so going back to anything. Have we covered everything you want to say about Guillermo? Yeah, we love Guillermo.
We love. We stand.
Absolutely love. And then what about Lazlo?
Oh, I could talk about Lazlo forever.
Okay, so let's talk about Lazlo then. So what are his positive qualities?
Fucking and fucking and fucking.
But it's interesting, right? Because actually, in some depictions of fat stereotypes, his sex obsession would be played negatively. Like, it would be played like perverted or gross. But the way it's played in What We Do in the Shadows is it's more like fun-loving. It's coming from a place of desire, and it's all. I come back to this. That's what vampires are for. Like, vampires are a representation of repressed sexuality, so it makes sense that Lazlo loves sex because he's meant to as a vampire. I just, again, I'm trying to think of like another film where, like, again, the fat person being a sex-obsessed person is played for grossness or played for villainy, even. As opposed to in What We Do in the Shadows, it's played for in jest and in a good light, in a positive light. So yes, you're right, his fucking is a positive quality. But in another show, it might not have been.
No, it wouldn't have been. They would have spun it in a completely different way. It would have been a problem, wouldn't it? Oh God, this fat person who actually had sex.
Actually, I think if, say, Nadja wasn't on the same level as Lazlo and was like almost like didn't want to have as much sex as Lazlo and saw him as a pest, that's how they would have spun it. Like, definitely. Oh, he's actually a sex pest. But because she's on the same level, as is all of the vampires.
Yeah,
it's the same. So that actually it's a positive thing.
It is. And I think it's good for people to see that fat people can talk about sex and have sex.
Yes.
Because people just assume, once again, because they're internalized anti-fatness, that fat people can't be sexy and aren't attractive. And we internalize that ourselves, and we internalize that as we don't deserve to have great sex. We don't deserve to experience fantastic orgasms.
Mm.
We don't deserve any of these things because we have fat bodies. Whereas actually seeing that being played out and Naja totally matching his energy and being like, yeah, come on, let's go. I love seeing that because we're also seeing a relationship where, they may be different sizes, but they still feel just as sexually charged towards each other as the other
100%.
person does.
Yeah.
And I like that because that normalizes that.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be a surprise that people of different sizes can find each other attractive and want to have sex. Like,
Mm-hmm.
cow surprise. Like, I love seeing that on the screen.
Yes, 100%. It's interesting because the last podcast I recorded was on Gavin and Stacey, and I had never seen it before the podcast. But that was something I was really into, as the characters of Smithy and Nessa are actually finding love. I mean, I'm going to question mark it because the way Smithy talks about Nessa at the very beginning of that show is disgusting. But obviously they work it out, they have a baby, all that good stuff, and then they end up together at the end. That's something really important. Like, I mean, in that situation, we've got two fat people finding love in each other. Because usually, like, in What We Do in the Shadows, we've got the token straight-sized person with the fat partner. So it's not as radical as two fat people finding love, but we'll take what we can, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll take what we can.
We'll take it.
We'll take it. And so, like, going back to like his positive qualities, like, he's absolutely in love with Nadja. Like, adores her, loves being a vampire, super curious about, he's like a science man, a man about science. He also, like, weirdly, because he can be really abrupt and rude and belittling, especially to Guillermo as the familiar. But he also has this real soft spot, which is when he knows Colin Robinson is dying, and he wants Colin to have like the best like last days, and then he looks after baby Colin Robinson.
Yeah, he brings him up.
He raises him and makes him like the dancing boy at the club. It's so weird.
Random.
It's so random. But then again with Guillermo, he knows something is wrong with him. And instead of like going straight to Nandor and potentially getting Guillermo in trouble, he says to Guillermo, like, we need to sort this out, we need to work this out together. And again, it just shows this softness to him that I think, especially in the earlier seasons, we didn't get a big look into.
Yeah. I think the way that they developed his character was just brilliant. I mean, I love everything that Matt Berry does anyway. His voice, like, all he has to say is just a couple of things and I will be just laughing so hard at those things. But the way that they've created him to move about as this kind of science man who is also completely clueless at the same time. While having that depth of that, like, looking to be abrupt, but having that actual deep care for people, because he obviously has deep care for Nadja. He obviously has deep care for Guillermo and, all of the people around him. But he would never put that across. And I think it's wonderful to see that depth within those characters. They've just done such a great job. I'm really sad that they're ending it. I know why they're ending it. Like, it feels like it's coming to a natural end in itself anyway. Like, how many times can you put all of these vampires in all of these scenarios?
Well, it's
and
interesting
without repeating yourself. But I would be really sad when they finish it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think they kind of like wrote themselves into a corner a little bit, where the only character who could really push forward growth is Guillermo, because everyone else is growing because of him and his influence, and I think there's also only so far they can push that as well. So I think it was the right time. I mean, I need to finish this season to see actually how it all ends, because I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was the right time to call it, if I'm honest. Thinking outside of our vampires and outside of the house, what does the rest of the world look like on Staten Island for like body diversity and fat representation? So my initial thoughts were like Beanie Feldstein's character in season 1, who Nadja bites. She's a bigger woman, and I also think of their neighbors.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the neighbors.
Yeah, especially the wife, and oh my god, the neighbors crack me up. The Brain Scramblies episode is one of the best episodes. It's so funny. On the super owl, superb owl. That's
so funny.
They were so excited to see the superb owl. It breaks my heart. And there's that gag where like Nadja has been like haunting the grandmother the whole time,
Yes.
but she's having to make it out that she's crazy. Oh my god, so funny. So
So brilliant.
funny. Sorry,
Oh,
yes.
it's so
Anyway,
good.
your thoughts.
I just think they bring more kind of realistic. It feels realistic. And that's so unusual to say about shows like that.
Mm-hmm.
To say, you know, what we see in media is so curated. It's something that I talk about, and I feel like I talk about a lot at the moment because it feels important.
Mm-hmm.
The people, when we're watching something on our screen, everything is intentional. You have
Yes.
very commonly, not all the time, but very commonly, some kind of white man who
Mm-hmm.
has gone, yes, I'm going to pick who's going to be the background. So I'm going to have that person in the background, that person in the background. They intentionally choose. And remember, we're also then automatically looking through a male gaze
Mm-hmm.
because that's just how society is set up, and that's how our media is set up. So we're staring through a male gaze on our screen, which isn't helpful anyway. We're also got a person and man's completely unchecked anti-fatness, internalized anti-fatness. They're not going to choose diversity.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to choose body, skin, just any kind of diversity they're not going to do. So to actually see, almost like we're not looking through, although we are, like the people who are there, like obviously our producers that we're talking about, they are cis men,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow they've managed to almost remove the male gaze from that, and they've managed to choose people and cast people who just look like people you would meet down Sainsbury's, or like, going to Costa to go and get their coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Just not, and it feels really refreshing. It shouldn't feel refreshing.
Yeah.
Because we should be able to see ourselves being represented and real life being represented, but that's not what we see.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what we're watching.
No, I think American shows seem to be a lot more strict on this than British shows. I think.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to argue myself a little bit because one of my favorite shows of all time is Doctor Who, and one of the things that has upset me greatly is that there's never been a fat assistant, like
Why? That'd be great.
companion. That was a bit sexist of me. Companion, but yeah, but why? But then the only fat companion they have had, arguably, is Matt Lucas in Peter Capaldi's era. But again, going back to your point earlier, cis man is allowed to be fat on screen, right?
Yeah, it's totally acceptable.
Totally acceptable. So actually, I am going to argue myself out of that. I don't actually think it is British or American focus. I think it is, like you say, it's a producer, it's a casting director who is projecting the vision of what this world is. And that's why I asked this question now, because I think it's really important, because it's great if you've got, a fat protagonist in Guillermo, fantastic. But if the rest of your world isn't also body diverse, then it's just a token fat guy, right? And so you have to go, okay, well, how deep does that kind of push for realistic representation go? And I think in What We Do in the Shadows, bearing in mind they actually don't have a massive supporting cast because a lot of what they do happens in the house or in the dark, so it's quite limited in that sense. But yeah, but when we do see the kind of outside world, there is a little bit of representation for sure. There are some notable characters, and where I am in this season now, season 6, Guillermo started a job at like a finance bro company. And from what I've seen, he is notably the only fat person I've seen employed there at the moment. So I want to see if wherever that storyline goes, if that stays the same or not. But again, that is a choice, right? Like, why have you not cast a fat background actor in this world? Are you trying to put something there, like, because going back to like anti-fat bias and stuff, some fat people might not get employed in a workspace like that because they're seen as lazy, or they're seen as that they can't keep up with the pace of these like super fast finance companies, So am I projecting some representation that they didn't mean to? I don't know, but I just wanted to follow that thought down. But yeah, it is an interesting choice. I think there's definitely some really good choices there, and maybe there could have been some more even better choices. I don't know.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that did stand out was, we've got some body diversity as in body size. We haven't got diversity in other ways.
Yes.
I think it would be really lovely to see more Black representation there as well for just in general. I think everything we're talking about when it comes to media, we can always go further, can't
Of
we, when it comes
course.
to diversity and showing representation of what real people look like on our screens as well. So it could always go further. I think
Yeah.
it's one of the ones, when I think about it, I think about it fondly. I think that it's been really refreshing, other than, as you said, that very first episode in this like last series. I think the rest of it has been so refreshing to be able to watch something that you can. I find it really tiring when you're watching something that you think that you're really enjoying, and then all of a sudden, bam, out comes a really
Jeanette.
cheap shot about fatness, or all of a sudden the person that you were really liking, they are trying to lose weight, or is something becomes about their weight. And it, for me, it becomes something that I was actually really enjoying, that felt very effortless to watch, and then suddenly goes into something that feels a bit more, although I'm enjoying the plot line, it feels more, I have to have more energy to watch it, because I feel like I'm a little bit more like I have to be ready for the next cheap shot that they're going to make about somebody's body. Whereas with the first 5 seasons has been really lovely and refreshing to watch without having to have that there.
Yeah. I think I couldn't agree more. I think up until season 6, I was like, oh, this is just great. Watching Guillermo's character growth has been absolutely amazing and fun. Kind of what Harvey Guillen was saying in that interview, like the fact that he could do that, and he will be representation for someone else now. You know what I mean? Like that's what's amazing, and that's why representation matters, and makes you go, I could do that. I could do that. Oh, that door is open to me. Oh, that's amazing. And it's so fantastic. And to not have to have my guard up throughout a show is amazing.
Like, there was a comedian, I remember like looking at that and just being like surely surely we have gone past fat jokes.
Surely. But then, actually, Jeanette, saying all that, I think they're going to get more rampant until we're past this latest wave of diet culture hell. As like I was saying at the very beginning, fat is seen as more of a choice more than ever, right? So I think it's going to get worse, because the shame, they want to shame, and they think, and in their warped brains, or at least how they justify it to themselves, is they think they're doing us a favor by shaming us into thinness,
which we know
doesn't work.
Of course it doesn't work. It actually destroys our mental health more than anything else, and has actually been shown to make us larger. There's nothing wrong in us becoming larger, but there's always something wrong with experiencing weight stigma, which is and can be very traumatizing
and bad for your health.
Like, awful for your health.
Literally bad for your physical health, bad for your blood pressure, bad for your resting heart rate, bad for your mental health. Like, it's not good for us to experience this weight stigma. Just let us live. And coming back to what we do in the shadows, these characters, these larger characters, are just allowed to live and exist, as you still put earlier, and you're absolutely right. They are allowed to just be. Anyway,
wouldn't that be nice for us?
Could we not extend that to the real world? Please. Please. Can we take a leaf out of What We Do in the Shadows book?
I had to spend like a day today with not the nicest of people, but one of the conversations that I had, and I think it, like, going back to you saying about how things are going to get worse, I think it's getting worse anyway, because I feel as if fatness has always been hated, but I think it's hated even more so now that people are becoming much more open with their anti-fatness than they have done. And this person, bear in mind, the context is that he's fat himself. The context is also that he's having a conversation with me. I am fat. And he decided to start talking about how he has his friends that create adaptable things for the office and for offices and stuff. And they had a woman who was, as he put, so massive that she kept on breaking the desk chairs that they had. So they had to create a desk chair that was large enough to accommodate her, but also strong enough to be able to hold her weight.
Okay.
And the way that he said it was like, my God, can you imagine being that large that you break everything, and it's so hideous and so disgusting. And
Lord.
it was horrible to listen, and he thought he was having a nice conversation with me
Yeah.
with shouting that.
He thought you
And yeah. And I'm like, I'm really glad that she got treated well by being able to have a chair made for her that is actually going to accommodate her body.
Yeah.
And that isn't that so wonderful that she gets the opportunity to have that. She shouldn't have had something just made for her. There should just be those things out there that we can just buy so our bodies are accommodated.
Yeah.
But at least she can be accommodated in her place of work now and be safe and know
Yeah.
that she's not
And
going to fall off her chair and injure herself.
literally be safe. That's the bare minimum that the workplace should be offering.
And he just brushed over that, went
Yeah,
straight through,
yeah.
but she'd never be able to fit into it was a really strange angle he was going for, but she'd never be able to sit in a plain seat. She'd have to be one of these people with two. And I was thinking to myself, oh, I'm also one of those people who could probably do with two seats.
I'd love 2 seats. It's so much
Wouldn't
more
it be amazing?
comfortable.
It'd be fantastic.
I really don't understand the airplane argument, because we all would benefit if the seats were bigger. Are you telling me you're comfortable? No, you're not. No one is comfortable. There's tiny, tiny, tiny seats. We would all, because they would benefit us all if they were all just a bit bigger and just had a bit more space in between. But these bootlickers, because they want to shit on fat people so bad, they are licking the arse of multi-billion-dollar companies.
Yes.
Like,
Capitalism again.
I don't mind being crammed into this little seat at all. Thanks, Ryanair. It's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Are you telling me you don't want more room? I cannot in any way understand that level of thinking, because they want the little prize that goes with fitting in the seat and not complaining.
I can fit in the seats. Look at me.
I'm a good person. Fuck off. No, it just drives me mad. It drives me mad. What's interesting, what that conversation you had with this man reminds me. I went to the pub with my parents a couple of years ago now, where they live, and a lot of my internalized fat phobia came from my parents. Big shock. And my dad's a bigger person, and so we get to the pub, and the chairs all have arms on them. And I go to sit down, and I instantly can tell, like, as soon as my arse hits the chair, I'm like, oh, this I can't fit.
This is not working.
And my dad, I watch, and I didn't mean to watch him at all, but I just could see that he also struggled to fit, but he was going to sit there and be uncomfortable, right? And so I said to the waiter, oh, could I swap this chair for that chair over there that doesn't have arms? It'd be a lot more comfortable for me. And the waiter obviously went, oh, of course, no problem, switch the chairs out. And my dad watched, and when I first asked to do that, I saw him get embarrassed. He was like, oh, like, he was embarrassed for me, like as if I've got too big to fit in the chair. But then as soon as it was resolved within 10 seconds, my dad then went, oh, could I swap chairs too? And I was like, you would have sat and been uncomfortable because you would not want to have brought any attention to your size, even though you're sat here, you're paying for your meal, you're paying for the service charge.
Yeah.
You're allowed to feel accommodation and being comfortable in this situation. Exactly. And just only because I said, did he think it was okay for him to then say
fat accommodation?
Fat accommodation.
You learn about fat accommodation from other fat people. So you were teaching him that it's okay to accommodate our bodies, and it is a challenge to be able to do that, because
it is.
We feel like we deserve the small chairs that cut.
I was going to say that punishment. Yeah.
We deserve. That's how we feel. That's how society has made us feel. We should just try and squeeze ourselves into the smallest of places that society hand us, without going, well, actually, this is painful. I'm getting bruises from these arms, and I deserve not to have bruises on my hips. Can I have an alternative, please? And it shouldn't be something that is shamed, because no matter, and this is one of the conversations I have with trolls, is like, it doesn't matter if a fat person is happy with their fat body, or it doesn't want to diet, doesn't want to actively shrink themselves, or whether a fat person does want to shrink themselves. Fat people still exist.
Yes,
we're still allowed to exist.
Yep.
We still need to be able to fit into spaces. We still need to buy clothes. Like, no matter where we are in that space of still having that internalized anti-fatness or challenging that, wherever we are, we still deserve the right to be able to fit into these spaces. So that's why fat accommodation is so incredibly important. And we've learned fat vanity from each other. We learn fat accommodation from each other. We should be vain about ourselves. And that's radical about ourselves. We should be able to go out there and go, you know what? I am hot.
Oh, Jeanette, I
I
have
am
got the biggest
really
ego.
hot.
Yeah, no, I can. The thing is, I have a big ego anyway. I can have a bit of a god complex, and I always think
You
that's
should.
okay because I have self-awareness.
Yeah.
Yes, I know I do. But like genuinely, sometimes when the trolls come in and they tell me that I'm ugly or whatever, I'm like, have you seen me?
Yeah, right.
You're barefaced lying. I'm sorry that I don't like fulfill what you think a fat person should look like, but we all know you're lying right now.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
You are teaching other people fat vanity. And that
I love
is
that. I'm a
political.
teacher.
That is radical to teach people fat vanity. We're told we shouldn't like our bodies. We should hate ourselves. Like, the opposite isn't just not food neutrality. The opposite isn't just body neutrality and fat acceptance. You know, all of that. The opposite of that is I'm going to be vain about myself because you know what? I am just hot. I am sexy. I look good and I know it. And I'm going to put that out there because that is wonderful and people need to see that.
Yeah. No, you're so right, actually. Like, it's again like kind of almost like selling our experience short by only aiming for neutrality, right?
Yeah,
like, actually, you should know, like I love that. The actual opposite of that is like, you know, fat joy. It's you know, fat vanity or fat ego, whatever it could be. Like, I love all that because, my God, like, we just don't see it. And we
you
just
don't.
don't see it. And then you wonder when you do see it, why do they react so violently against it? Like, why do they care so much? Because it's not the norm and they know that they can't control us. As soon as we've broken apart and gone, actually, I don't need to drink that tea in order to feel my best sexy self, then there's nothing that they can grab onto to control us in order to buy something back into conformity. Love that. I do love being fat. Like, you said earlier, like, how you're accused of making it part of your personality. But when it's something that's so in your face, you know what I mean? We can't hide it. We can't hide it.
There's no hiding it.
There's no hiding it. And also, like, so it's okay for people to call me fat, but it's not okay for me to call myself fat and love it. Apparently, me doing that makes it part of my personality, but apparently it's
How
not part
dare
of
you.
your personality for, like, calling me fat in a negative way, in a derogatory way. That's okay. But apparently, me then taking that and taking the power back, that's making it part of my personality, and again, in a negative context. You just can't win. So therefore, like, I find it so difficult because sometimes I go, I can't win, so I'm not going to play the game. But at the same time, we can't not play the game because it is just part of how we work as a civilization at the moment.
And that's what makes it so difficult. I mean, you know, at the moment, as it stands right now, as I'm sitting here right now, I'm really lucky that I don't have any health issues that are going on. But I know that because our bodies change, no matter what diet culture and wellness and anti-aging tells us, our bodies are absolutely going to change. The majority of us, no matter if we're fat or if we're straight-sized or anywhere in between, the majority of us are going to experience ill health. Some of us are going to experience being disabled, whether that's permanent, whether that's temporary. That is absolutely going to happen to every single one of us to one point or another. So because our bodies are changing, because they're going to change constantly, we will end up being ill or disabled, majority of us. So we actually have to come to a place that we're going to know that the NHS is going to actually want to change our bodies. So because I'm privileged right now with my health, that I don't have to go to the NHS, because we know that weight is so gate kept, it's easier for us, those of us who don't have that intersection of ill health and disability, to be able to love our bodies, to feel vain about our bodies, because we haven't experienced stuff like the NHS gatekeeping us. Now, what do we do when we get to the stage where maybe we need a knee replacement, maybe we need a hip replacement, and all we're butting up against is you've got to lose weight, you've got to lose weight, you've got to lose weight, no matter where you go. And that's where we find that people kind of start wavering with, no matter how long they have been wanting to be radically fat and enjoying their fat body and loving their fat body, that's where we start thinking, oh God, maybe I now are being forced to conform, whether we like it or not.
100%.
And I think those are the pinch points, the really difficult bits that we get to with our journeys in fatness, because we're all going to experience that. We're all going to experience weight stigma. And it's coming to that place of knowing that we're going to have to be really hard with our advocacy. We're going to have to tirelessly advocate for ourselves within the NHS to be able to get that equal healthcare that we all should be able to get access to, that we can't get access to. And I think it's important to note that all of these intersections, including that disability, really makes it far more difficult. For me, I am white, I'm cisgendered, I am straight. Those give me the privileges that make it easier, and I'm able-bodied, easier to be able to love my fat body. And I think it's important to know that that may change as we change with our bodies as well. And it's challenging those things as it comes up as well, because even though we get to the stage, maybe we might need medical intervention and people are talking about weight loss and stuff like that, it's challenging that as it comes up in ourselves, trying to challenge that with our medical, like our healthcare professionals. And that's hard. So being able to give ourselves some self-compassion as well is so important, because we're not perfect. None of us are perfect. In fact, arguing that perfectionism doesn't actually exist, because that's, white supremacy and capitalism that creates that in itself, is a conversation. But I think that is really important to note in regards to that, which is where my brain was going.
Yes. So I think you raise a really good and interesting point, and it's one of those things, because I always, whenever I talk about kind of weight loss on social medias, I always caveat it to say I'm not anti-weight loss. I'm really not. And I know people can get it twisted, because I am fat positive, all about fat liberation, fat joy, all that good stuff. Personally, I'm not pursuing weight loss at this stage of my life, but I'm also not a forward thinker, and you have no idea what's coming down the line, right? And the thing is, something might happen to me which might mean I do lose weight, either intentionally or unintentionally. I can't fucking call it. I can't see the future. But for me, when I say I love my fat body, I want to make it clear I do. But I think paramount to that is I love me, and I love me at every size I may be. And don't get me wrong, I think from a systemic issue point of view, the situation you've described where being literally gatekept from healthcare, that would be difficult, I think, on anybody, regardless of how much work you've done. But I think the work you do about knowing, what am I trying to say? That kind of resilience and being able to advocate for yourself is so, so important. And it's so difficult. It's so difficult.
Oh, it's tiring.
And especially when it's happening within a health environment. Because regardless of fashion availability, or whether you can fit on a plane seat, or whatever it might be, or success in relationships or in career, health is science based. And so, as far as we're aware, and I'm not a health expert by any means, so if a health expert then told me, hey, Hannah, you need to lose weight, I would find it really difficult, even now, all the work I've done, to, be actually, I've tried that. Because when a troll comes after me with that, I know I
Mhm.
can defend myself because I go, actually, I was in a really physically and mentally unhealthy place
Mhm.
before I got recovery. My recovery has not led to weight loss, but I know I am mentally and physically healthier. Like,
Mhm.
that's what all my data says. But if a
Definitely.
doctor challenged me on that, I'd feel, that kind of that authority figure. Oh, but you know what you're talking about. A troll doesn't know what they're talking about. You know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. I'm just trying to put myself in that position. I think I would really struggle with that. So, do you have any advice on how we can kind of build that resilience up and able to advocate for ourselves in those kind of medical environments?
Do some, I hate saying this because we shouldn't have to, do some reading beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an idea of, what's going on and what's going on with your body, try to find some health for every size resources, so that if you Google health for every size health sheets, there's
Mm-hmm.
some great health sheets that have been put together by doctors themselves of how to access and weight inclusive care for various things like type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. There's so
Mm.
many joints, arthritis, and they're really brilliant and they're really fantastic. So you can always print those things out and take those with you. And as soon as someone says weight loss, you say, I have read there are alternatives. Always know that regardless of anything, pretty much, when a doctor, when a healthcare professional is telling you weight loss is the cure, is the key, is
Mm.
always lazy medicine. It is always lazy healthcare. Key question to ask is, so what would you recommend to someone who was smaller than me? Because they're not going to recommend weight loss to someone who is within, and I hate BMI, but
Yeah.
quote unquote,
Yeah.
normal BMI. They wouldn't be recommending weight loss. What would you recommend to someone who wasn't in the same body that I'm in? And that usually pushes their brain to something else. You should be able to say these things and try to hold these boundaries, but they have still been pushed back by doctors. So
Of
then in
course.
that case, it's then going and getting a second opinion, which is tiring, which is inconvenient, which is difficult because you don't know if the second opinion is going to be the same.
Yeah.
It's all not the greatest of experiences, and we shouldn't have these experiences, but it is all about trying to seek out, and it's easier to seek out in community as well. So
Mm.
try and find your community as well, because there's always going to be someone who can say, hey, actually I read this and this is
Mm-hmm.
a really good weight inclusive way of talking about things with your doctor, and there'll be ways of sharing it. So find your community, ask questions. And that's the thing that us fat people don't do, because we're so ashamed of our bodies. We're taught about that shame. We're taught that we shouldn't be fat. We don't talk about our fat bodies. And we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah.
try and seek that out.
Yeah.
So even just putting that out there will be someone who knows, and some way that you'll be able to find it. But weight inclusive care is where it's at, and where you're going to get the best care that you can get.
Amazing. No, thank you so much for sharing like all of those resources.
Oh, I've got a blog
Incredibly
as well.
helpful.
Really good blog, I have to say.
What's that?
Really good. I've got a really good blog as well.
Oh, there we go. Okay, well, great, fantastic.
If you go onto my website, so antidietworld.co.uk, and if you go into my blog, I've got two blogs. One of them is about, it is called, I can't remember what it's called. Let me have a look quickly what it's
Mm-hmm.
called. I wrote them specifically for this reason,
Mm-hmm.
because I had the same people again and again, understandably, coming to me going, but what about my health? There you go. It's actually called that. So my first one is called Anti-Diet, but what about my health? And the other one is, does dieting and weight loss work? A UK perspective, because we always see stuff from a US perspective.
Yes.
So I thought a UK perspective would be quite nice for us. But then also that health thing of, but what about my health? I'm constantly told that I'm going to be unhealthy, or I am unhealthy because of my weight. So I wrote those two blogs
Mm-hmm.
with that in mind, to be able to help people. And they are all science informed and science based as well. So have a read of those if you want to read further about your health and fatness.
Perfect. I mean, I think that's the perfect way to end the podcast. So let's wrap this baby up. Thank you for sharing all that, Jeanette. I really, really appreciate it. And I know listeners will appreciate it as well. Okay, so bring it back to what we do in the shadows. We really have covered all bases in this episode. But let's round up what we were here to speak about originally. So at the end of A Fat's on Film, episode, we like to rate whatever we've watched on how well we think that they represent fat bodies and other kind of body types, and we like to rate them out of ourselves. So out of our 5 possible Jeanettes, what would you give What We Do in the Shadows?
I think I'm usually a very generous person. It would have been 5 Jeanettes if that first episode of the last season would have happened.
Yeah.
So I'm going to remove a Jeanette because I am very important. We're going to give it 4 out of 5 Jeanettes because of that.
You know what? I swear down, I don't just copy. My guest says I have a number in my head and I will just say the number whatever you say. But I really was going to go for 4 Hannahs, okay? I was going to go for 4 Hannahs, citing the exact same reason you did. It's like, that's it. I've got nothing more to add. But I just want to reiterate again, I think, no, not reiterate. I just want to give a special call out to the costume design of this show.
Mm-hmm.
It is phenomenal. I want to wear everything they all wear. They look fantastic. Yeah. Guillermo's cardigan jumper game is next level. Next level.
And he looks so good in them.
He looks phenomenal. I love his little shirts and little button-ups.
I know.
I love the wigs that Nadja wears with her little bumpies and little bows and stuff.
And
so
they've been changing for that last season. Every single season, she's had like something else going on, and I've been loving it. I'm like,
yeah, no, I love it. It's a really good part of the show. Really, really fun. Okay, so that is the end of this episode of what I was going to say What We Do in the Shadows. That's not my show. That's not my show. My show is Fats on Film.
I didn't realize I was signing up for that.
Okay, yeah, that's the end of this episode of Fats on Film. Jeanette, thank you so much for joining me. Could you let me and the listeners know where they can find more of you and your work?
And find me mainly on Instagram at Anti-Diet World. My website I've already given, but those are the main 2 places that you'll be able to find me. So come and join me. I'm mainly in my stories, and I try and post on my grid whenever I can.
Perfect. And the link to all Jeanette's things will be in the show notes below to make it super, super easy for you. And the listeners can find me at Queen Bee Says on TikTok and Instagram. And that's where I share all my fashion stuff and kind of like kind of life stuff. And then you can also follow the podcast at Fats on Film on Instagram. And please also, you can email me at fatsonfilm@outlook.com. Just if you want to drop a note, say hi, give any recommendations of other things you want to cover on. You want me and a guest to cover on the podcast, because this is a community effort at this point. It's not just me. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and I will catch you at the next one. And remember to stay fat. Woo!